Hello, this is Marge Benham Hutchins, and this is Health Informatics at Northeastern University. And the lecture today will be on change theory and technology adoption. Today we're going to focus our discussion on one particular change theory, and that is the diffusion of innovations by Everett Rogers. His theory attempts to explain and predict the variables that influence how and why new users adopt an innovation. And because of that, it's used quite often to understand and even predict the success or failure of health information technology. Some of Rogers' core theoretical concepts are diffusion, innovation, and communication. He defines diffusion as the process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of a social system. This could be, for instance, a hospital or a healthcare organization. And innovation, and many times this would be introduction of health information technology, but it can be an idea, practice, or an object that is perceived to be new. So it's something that we want people to change from one way of doing things to another. And communication, he defines as the process in which the participants create and share information with one another to reach a mutual understanding. Some additional important theoretical components of the diffusion of innovations theory are that individual innovation adoption decisions are influenced by the innovation adoption behaviors of other members of the social system. So that basically means that in the case of a nurse, her decision or his decision to adopt new technology can be influenced by other members of that social system. And that could be other nurses, that can be other healthcare providers, it could be the IT department. All of these different things influence and the decision by the individual. The diffusion of innovation theory, DOI theory, also identifies that opinion leaders and the mass media have powerful effects on the process. And we'll discuss that a little bit more. Rogers identifies 5 adopter categories: innovators, early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and laggards. The innovators, which are the smallest group, they usually adopt new technology very quickly. They're very venturesome. They have the ability to cope with uncertainty. Early adopters come next. Quite often these are the people that are viewed as role models. They're respected by their peers. And they make a very well-informed decision. They don't just jump in. They probably watch to see how things went for the innovators. They do a lot of reading, researching, so they know about the technology. And these are the group that are often referred to as opinion leaders. The next category are the early majority. They are not quite as quick as the early adopters. They deliberate a bit more before adopting. The late majority quite often start adopting because of pressure from their peers. They may be a little skeptical of the new technology and a bit more cautious. The laggards, on the other hand, are usually very suspicious of innovation in general and have a very long decision process. All 3 of these categories are strongly influenced by early adopters, according to Rogers' research. Rogers' research identified that these categories of innovativeness, these adopter categories, are normally distributed, that they form a bell curve, with the smallest percentage being the innovators at just 2.5%. Then you have the early adopters, 13.5%. And then the bulk of the adopters are in the early or late majority, and then the laggards. And that they all will look towards these opinion leaders to help make their decisions. So applying the diffusion of innovation theory to a health information technology implementation would mean that you need to be aware of the different adopter categories. And this would be during your implementation. You would obviously want to be aware of some of these characteristics in order to target your educational efforts. It has been shown that it's very important to target those early adopters because they are opinion leaders and they influence the adoption by others. So when you include them in the decision making and project teams, super users, you will also have an opportunity for them to learn the system, to have the buy-in, and then also help to implement it and help to influence positively the other people. So now we're going to discuss a little bit of the mechanism of diffusion, basically the decision-making process. An important assumption of DOI theory has to do with the decision-making process, and that is that there is a decision to be made, that it's not authoritative or collective, and that each member in a healthcare environment, that would be nurses, physicians, all healthcare providers that are part of that organization, face their own innovation decision. Now, in the healthcare environment, we know that sometimes the buy-in and the use of the system is not as cut and dried. It's not exactly authoritative or collective, but then it's not exactly your own decision either. So there's this gray area, and this is where those opinion leaders can really make a difference on whether the system is used optimally or not. Rogers views that the innovation decision process occurs in 5 steps. Initially, there's knowledge. The person becomes aware of an innovation, maybe has a little idea how it functions, is a little curious about it. And then the persuasion stage, that is when the person forms a favorable or unfavorable attitude towards this innovation. Then the person makes a decision. The person engages in activities that lead to a choice to adopt or reject the innovation. The implementation stage, that's when the person puts an innovation into use. And confirmation, that when the person is involved with evaluating the results of a decision they've already made. This is a diagram of that innovative decision process and an overview of DOI theory. And as you can see, if you look at this closely, and I recommend that you go to the PDF slides to take a closer look at this particular diagram before answering the Blackboard questions, because it has a lot of information in it and it helps you pick up the flow of the whole theory. Some researchers working on information systems have built upon Rogers' diffusion of innovation model to include the antecedents, or the things that must be present for the adoption of information system innovations. And so they add a whole nother component to this, and they look at technical compatibility, technical complexity, that's how easy is it to use, and the relative advantage, and that's the perceived need. Does somebody actually need this? And when you combine these things together for an implementation of information system, these are the things that influence the adoption. For our Blackboard discussion this week, we're going to discuss how steps 1 to 3 of the innovation decision process are accomplished in the healthcare environment. And those are the knowledge, persuasion, and decision steps. For example, if you take step 1, knowledge, if you look at the diagram developed by Rogers, you will see that he identifies that knowledge is influenced by prior conditions. That is the previous practice, whether you feel there is a need or a problem, how innovative, and then the norms of the social system. So if you apply this to health information technology adoption, you would start to think about, how will this influence my workflow? How will this new technology influence the job I'm trying to do? How will it influence patient care? Will it actually solve a problem, or is it going to create problems? Or a little bit of both. Does the organizational culture support change? Many people, no matter how innovative they are, if there isn't enough time to learn it, if there isn't good educational training available, then they're probably not going to be as excited about adopting something new. The timing of the innovation. And then who is already doing it? And that's the norms of the social system. Are other healthcare providers doing this? Am I aware that this is going on in other organizations? Have I used it myself in other practice? These will all influence the level of knowledge an individual has, and that knowledge is going to influence their eventual decision. So for our Blackboard discussion, you will discuss how steps 1 to 3 of the innovation decision process are accomplished in the healthcare environment. So you build a bit more on the knowledge here, and then discuss persuasion and decision. And I encourage you to look closely at the overview of diffusion of innovation theory diagram that's provided in this presentation, but also in a PDF format for you to examine closer. We have one required reading this week on diffusion of innovation technology, written by Carol Romano. She's a nurse at the National Institutes of Health. I also encourage you to do a Google search, and I think you will find a wealth of information and many applications of this theory to help you think about it a little bit more in answering the Blackboard questions. And I think these things will build on this lecture. This is just a short overview of one change theory, but it's extremely important to be aware when you're implementing technology, or if you're the person who's actually been asked to implement it, that you're asked to do something different, that you recognize the stages and how a theory such as diffusion of innovations might influence how not only you adopt health information technology in your workplace, but also how you adapt new technology in your home.